So my name is Lynne Thompson. I'm a fellow of 2016, and I'm a co-facilitator with.
Hirokazu Kosaka.
So what we're hoping, because they told us that this is what we should do, is to make sure that everybody has a chance to participate in the conversation. Hopefully we all got the same questions. So I'm going to kick it off and look to one of you to jump right in. The question that we have was, Los Angeles has been a preeminent space of artistic integration of Western and non-Western peoples and ideas. The question is, what aspects of LA culture and history propel this integration? Don't be shy. Who'd like to start off?
I just know for myself, what are we supposed to be talking about, ourselves or others? So I was born in LA, and so it had a huge effect on me because we moved up to Seattle when I was in 4th grade. And that was a huge effect because back in '72, Seattle was not what it is today. And LA was a lot, just like it is today. It was a huge melting pot, which I loved. And when we moved up to Seattle, that really affected me. It was a lot harder to find gefilte fish. And there were some stereotypes about being Jewish. And that wasn't happening down in LA just because there was a lot more Jewish people down in LA. And my mom's side is Tlingit, is Native American. And you got a lot more of that up in Seattle than you did down here in LA because that's part of Alaska. And I came back down to LA as soon as I could. I would come and visit every summer a family that I knew. And I went to Cal Arts, and I stayed here since. And Seattle's a nice place to visit. Now it's got great art, but and I was going to say some other things about culture that I had to take notes on because I can't remember these. And the two things that I do remember is when I was in college, one of the things that they had written on your report cards or whatever, your critiques, was I remember them saying that my art was very native. And I thought that was really great because that just meant it was really great. Then I read it about 20 years later, and it said it was very naive. And I was telling someone here about how I was buying this shampoo because I just started to dye my hair. And came in an orange bottle, like an orange tan bottle, and it said for women of color. And so I was about halfway through the bottle before I realized they weren't talking about your hair being dyed a different color. So I just somehow, to me, all of this has to do with LA because LA is just a bunch of goofy people that are all, even the people here that aren't artists in LA are kind of in a really good way. So I don't know what else to say except I love LA.
Let me just add, so Hirokazu and I met briefly before this and talked about the way that the different cultures in LA really affected us as artists, me as a writer, and he as an artistic director and also more of a visual artist, and how the different cultures in Los Angeles really affects our work. A lot of my work is affected by the fact that I grew up partially in a Japanese American neighborhood. So that was something that he and I could really talk a lot about and how that affected us. And I think that's one of the things that we want to make sure we touch on as well while we're together. And I wondered if anybody else had a similar type of experience as artists.
Okay, my name is Denise Uyehara, and I'm Okinawan and Japanese American, and I didn't realize I was Okinawan American really until I came to Los Angeles. I started working with Okinawan community in Gardena, but also in this little Tokyo area. And because of that, I went in 2003 to Okinawa and learned more about my relatives there and about the Battle of Okinawa and the US and Japanese occupation there. I bring that up because in creating performance around it, which is what I received the COLA for, I learned I was kind of a walking contradiction because I carried a US passport my relatives there received me as an Okinawan. They're like, oh, you've come home. And yet I felt this very strange contradiction of like, I have this privilege of being from a superpower. And I was watching colonization happen before my eyes. So coming back here, I really wanted to figure out what was my place, our place as US residents, as people living here. What is our connection to, and our relationship to the rest of the world? Are we at the center of the world, or are we just part of a large pluralistic conversation? And that's also now led me to work with other indigenous groups in the Southwest. I now live in Tucson. Okinawans are considered indigenous people of the southernmost islands, of which is now Japan. And so I've learned a lot from being in a very culturally diverse community in Los Angeles, where people are all constantly grappling with, who are we? What is our connection to the rest of the world? What is our connection to either lineage or to places that we're occupying or bombing, or, you know, what is that? And what are we supposed to do with that information and the situation we're in? And a lot of times I think as artists we feel a little bit helpless, but what we do, as I think that's what we're supposed to do, is to create work that unpacks those very complicated situations and asks us difficult questions.
Good evening. My name is Malathi Iyengar. I'm the artistic director of Rangoli Dance Company. I came here a long time ago in 1974, and then I went to UCLA, and of course marriage brought me here, and I practice Indian classical dance called as Bharatanatyam. But I just want to touch upon two aspects of what I do and what I create, how it affects me being in California and how it affects others as audience members. That's what I would like to share. One, when I was doing my MFA, I was constantly asked to deconstruct my art form all the time. I looked at that as diluting the art form. To me, you know, because they wanted me to go to the core of things. Oh, Malathi, when you, these are so beautiful, but we don't understand what you're doing. But then I felt, do you have to understand everything? You know, in art, it's okay sometimes, you know, not to understand everything. It's okay to maybe get an essence of what's going on sometimes. Maybe you understand certain mood that I created in my piece. Maybe it was anger, maybe it was joy, maybe that came to you in my piece, or maybe I created certain shapes, certain groups, that abstract elements that gave you joy. That's okay by me too. But then there are some audience members, obviously they do understand what I'm doing. So I felt that more than deconstruction, I felt, because I'm showing my works to a mainstream audience, not necessarily all the time Indian people. I don't have all the time Indian people in my audience. What was important to me was, because I'm here in LA, in California, that finding different ways to stage the things in multiple ways, so each one of you will take away something from my work. That's what I focused on. So in other words, trying to choreograph or create from an audience point of view versus my own point of view. So will I sit through this for an hour or 2 hours? You know, and will I pay $30 ticket to go see this performance? So that's what has helped me go into introspection and examining my own work to see how many ways can I make this accessible to maybe these 10 people or maybe this group of people, and find different elements in a 1-hour program that I may create. So maybe you'll take away something from it. That's one thing. And the other point that I would like to make is, which is very frustrating for us classical dancers and musicians, is the moment they see me visually, before, for many years, they thought I was doing belly dance. I'm not doing belly dance. I'm doing classical dance, which is like ballet. It takes years and years to get the grammar and master it, and then, you know, get to a point where you feel spiritually and artistically fulfilled, hopefully someday, you know. So I'm not doing belly dance. Now, in the last 10 years, I've had to defend myself saying, oh, you do Bollywood? No, I don't do Bollywood. I'm not doing Bollywood either. So, but nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with either one. Neither am I offended by those questions. But I think it is much harder for my type of art form, the classical art forms, because they have such deep roots and they do not give, what I do will not give you immediate gratification. It's a gratification over time, whether you're learning or you're practicing an art form. So it has been a challenge to make it stand and say that this stands on its own and it works. So I don't want to take up too much time, but those are the two important points that I think many of us face. So, thank you.
Well, thank you. I think let's keep in this subject about a particular immigration of art. I think the cultural immigration to Los Angeles, how much diversity in Los Angeles. I know I speak myself, but I'm an immigrant here, and I remember coming to the States in the 60s, and I saw an incredible amount of a diversity here. I come from, again, a traditional family as well. And the question that I think it impacted me was, are you Japanese or Chinese? And I never been asked when I was in Japan, are you Japanese or Chinese? We all are Japanese, so that kind of question didn't come up. But that was very important for me. I think let's keep it in that subject and a cultural kind of diversity here. And so, anybody who's immigrant here, by the way? Yeah, I think let's speak to you about that.
Hi, my name is Gayotto, and I immigrated from Brazil in 1993 to pursue my Master of Fine Arts here at UCLA. And like you, I feel that before coming here, I wasn't aware where my roots were from. I wasn't concerned about that in my artistic work. And I think coming to LA brought that kind of aspect of interest in cultures and people, and that had a huge impact in my practice today, and how I am trying to I'm interested in portraying different cultures and diversity in my work. So and I actually find this is a really interesting event, how we are all here, and how this event brought us together, and how we are all from different places. And that's a portrait of our city, in a way. We are a portrait of it. And so, and as a person that now I consider myself an LA-based artist, I think that I become part of the diversity as well, and my history is part of the city too, so.
Hi, my name's Maryrose Mendoza, and my parents immigrated in '69, and we came shortly after in 1970. And I found out that I am a 1.5G immigrant generation, so I have found that living here has been kind of more of an assimilation of America, and that I've had to find ways to connect to actually my home country. And I'm really gratified to see that after all of these years, with Filipinos being a majority Asian population in California for so many years, are finally getting a little bit of recognition, particularly with how Filipino food is starting to get some attention. And it's been, I think for me, it's been more an investigation of what have I kept as a Filipino, and how I have been I guess integrating so well my American the influence of America, and kind of deciphering through making art what is my culture, and or is my culture just a hybrid culture? Yeah, thank you.
I'm not, I'm an immigrant from the Midwest. But my parents immigrated from Baghdad, and I was born in Indianapolis, and we were a minority of one family in Indianapolis. Because not on top of being Iraqi, we're Jewish. So we were a minority in every community we belonged to. And but I wasn't really conscious of that. I mean, I knew we were different, but I didn't know why until, and then we moved here, and there is a community here. And I actually felt extremely stifled because it was a more traditional community. All of a sudden, my grandmother lived with us, and she had all these rules, and I did everything wrong. So I rebelled against my parent culture, and I thought of it as a drag and a detriment. And I went to UCLA also in 1974. And anyway, I ended up at USC as a grad student in the late 80s when the multiculturalism movement started. And I was invited to be a guest. I got a student grant to go to the Vista Award ceremony. I don't know if people remember. It was, I think it was sponsored by the Women's Building, but they honored women in Los Angeles. And one of the women they honored, I can't remember her name. Maybe some of you know her. She's a Japanese-American koto player. Koto? Yeah. And she told a story of when she was taking lessons. She had to go to Japanese school, and she had to learn an instrument, so she learned the koto, but she asked her teacher to teach her how to play Duke of Earl on the koto. And her story just resonated with me so much, and I was in graduate school by then, but I didn't ever consider my own background as something that I could draw on and combine with what I grew up with. So then I started to very consciously investigate that in my work, and that became the impetus for, all the work I've done since then. So I think that was something about being in Los Angeles that I was, able to see in somebody else something that could apply to me.
I'm Jennifer Sealeo. I'm a native of Southern California, grew up in the suburbs, was born in Burbank and grew up in the suburbs. And so my upbringing and my childhood felt very homogenous in the community I grew up in. And it took me moving to Long Beach, where I live now, to have a much better appreciation for and experience with and exposure to a wider swath of people. And I love living in Long Beach because it's just this really quirky melting pot of people, and and everything from working class really hardscrabble people to a lot of artists and a lot of musicians. And so it's something that definitely pushed my art even further. I mean, my work has always been so much about the suburbs and about the urban experience and about where nature and civilization collides. And so, but it really became more, I think, a little bit more diverse and a little more interesting, at least for myself, when I could see more of Long Beach and LA rather than what I grew up with in the suburbs. So that definitely shifted it for me.
Hello. Is it on?
I think it's on.
Okay. My name's Linda Arreola. I wanted to go back a little further, maybe even what this area, how it influenced me anyway. And As a child, I'm born and raised in LA, and I actually live in a community called El Sereno all my life, just about. But the light, the ocean, and this feeling of anything can happen and happen here in this place specifically was really a predominant sensation I had as a child growing up. And thinking about the ocean, we spent a lot of time at Santa Monica Beach as a child. I'm Mexican American. I was raised by a single parent, and my father would drive myself and my brother out on the weekends to the beach. And there was a feeling of sort of a birthing, or maybe this is a place to nest for all types of people and places and ideas and all things to come together. And it seemed to be a really unique sensation here, that these cultures that, and I was very aware that I was Mexican American. My neighborhood was Japanese, Chinese, and Mexican American. There was a little Anglo American and a few blacks. And so I thought that was a really strong feeling of this new culture developing that was both, non-Western and Western. And the other thing that was really significant is that we're so close to Mexico, and yet it seemed like such a distance away. And I'm being Mexican American, didn't know anything about Mexico until I took a trip with my brother, and it was just like jumping on buses and trains and seeing the pyramids for the first time. And I was blown away. I thought, this is the best kept secret. How could I live in a city like this and not know that this existed just a stone throw away, it seemed. And it was a great influence on my art developing, and sort of the light and space and the simple geometries reminded me of something also very new that I wasn't aware of. So there was a combination of things that I thought was very unique to LA that could only happen in LA, and because of some of the environment and the demographics and, history of faraway places, that was actually very close.
I'm going to pass this along to you, but before I do that, listening to everyone who's spoken thus far reminded me that this melding of Western and non-Western cultures in this city is something I appreciate whenever I go to any other city in the States. And people, have asked me, well, if you had to move, where would you move? I said, it would be hard not to be able to have Indian food or to hear particular kinds of music or whatever, and you go other places and you think, oh my God, where are the people? So anyway, just listening to all of you reminded me of that.
I grew up in Los Angeles. I'm a Southern California native. But I think my unique growing up experience is that I went to a Japanese American Catholic school in Little Tokyo, and I was really surrounded by Japanese Americans when I went to school. But when I would go home, I lived in East LA, so my neighborhood was predominantly Latino. And I was at home, I played with all the kids on my block. And it's funny because they would always call me Chino, and it kind of goes to your Chinese Japanese thing. And I'd say, wait, I'm not Chino, I'm Japanese. Why are you calling me Chino? But it was something I grew up with. I watched a lot of Westerns, and I grew up an American watching Brady Bunch and stuff like that. So there was always this constant evolution of my identity, talking about hybridity. And I think probably the most transformative experience growing up in East LA was I used to be a roadie for a group called Los Illegals, and Willie Heron was the singer. And I think working with them really showed me that art could make a statement, it could say something, it could be used to change the way people look at things. And so a lot of my work deals with hybridity and how our identities are shaped by the diverse cultures in Los Angeles.
I'm Mike Pierzynski. I'm a Midwestern transplant as well. I grew up in St. Louis, and I had my grandparents on one side, great-grandparents on the other side were immigrants. But, I had the European immigrant experience, and St. Louis, it's changed a lot, but at that time it was largely black and white city, a lot of racism. It's better now, but I lived in New York for 8 years. And that's a city of immigrants, but it's still very, at the time anyway, it seemed very European, And when I moved, I've been here since '89. I've lived in the same apartment in Koreatown for that long, and you notice the difference right away here. The Asian communities here are huge compared to New York, and also the Mexican and Central American influence. It just feels more non-Western from the start because of the immigrant communities. And building on what you said, Linda, about there's just an openness here too compared to New York to just within the art world. It's not as competitive, and there are more people, maybe because it's more spread out and you spend more time at home, and you don't go out drinking as much as you do in New York. I think people tend to make more personal and idiosyncratic and less commercial work, maybe. Not everyone, but and it's not as competitive. The artists aren't as competitive. You have more space to work, more light. I don't know. I just think it makes for. I prefer it here. You know, it makes for a better working atmosphere for me.
And how does it impact your work specifically?
I don't know that it has really, but I just find it easier to work here. I was socializing a lot more in New York. I was younger too. But, and my wife is, she's also from St. Louis, but she's Japanese American. Her father was from Sacramento, and she does not want to move back to St. Louis at all. She was at that time, there were only a handful of Asians there. So, you know, I have a half Asian child, and they're more comfortable here.
I was thinking kind of as a follow-up to what you were saying, Linda. Some of you spoke about it a little bit, but I was wondering how this environment, which we all seem to agree has affected us, at least personally, how, if at all, it's manifested in your art. Whether I think most of you are visual artists, maybe some writers as well, and I was just wondering for any of you that want to respond, how this melting pot of Western and non-Western cultures in Los Angeles has affected your work, if it has.
Well, I have worked with the history of Los Angeles in my work. One of the first projects I did when I came out of grad school, I was also funded by the city of LA, individual artist grant, to create a piece called Home Site, Home City. And for that, I worked with another artist, Lauren Kasmer, and we created like a sort of a structure that we invited people to fill, and we showed in various public places, and every time collected things from the public. They look like these really huge doll houses or cabinets of curiosity, and we made like little boxes and gave them to people and to artists, a lot of artists. And they would fill them and give them back to us, and they became rooms in the house. Because I had the experience when my youngest brother was in high school, and I was the family chauffeur, so I had to pick them up and drop them off. And he was at his girlfriend's, and his girlfriend was Japanese American. And I went up to pick him up from his girlfriend's and went into the house, and it was like every other house on the block. And you open up the door and you walk in, and it's like you're in Japan. Like mats on the floor and screens, and it just struck me so much that if you could take the walls off people's houses and look inside, how different, even though they look the same on the outside. So that did really strike me, and it actually was the impetus for making that piece.
Yeah, just quickly, I feel if I didn't live in India, I would only live here because I feel California is, You know, it's I feel it's a country by itself, although it's a state, you know, and I do feel at home with people like all of you. So I wouldn't think of myself anywhere else, and I'm thankful that for my citizenship.
So for the past 10 years, I've been living in Tucson, Arizona, and it's diverse in different ways. A huge indigenous community and a Mexican American community. I feel like I'm maybe one or maybe one of two Japanese Americans of my generation there. So I really realized how much richness there is in Los Angeles in particular, because there are reference points to reflect back who you are or maybe your community, so that you don't have to represent the whole community, for one thing, but you can also, there's also a real encouragement to exchange ideas and cultures. And I had the experience of working here with the Sacred Naked Nature Girls, which is a culturally diverse experimental group. And we were, it was African American, white, but from working class, poor background, Asian American, and someone from Taiwan in our group, and Jewish American. And we did a lot of really heated work, very experimental, but also a lot of laughter and exchange of ideas, and really talking about how we were different, but also where we had points of intersection. And I think because of that, that was something I felt really happened because we were living in Los Angeles, that highways performance space in particular. And there was a real a community that encouraged that kind of dialogue. And they said, we know it's going to be hard. The 1992 uprising just happened, and now you get to, this is your turn. What can you learn from putting yourselves in a room together, creating performance naked around these issues? By the end of the work, we weren't naked anymore for some reason. We just had to be clothed, because I think it was because it was the nakedness of who we are. We were more naked that way. Where you could just kind of be vulnerable and say, I don't know everything about you, but it's okay. We can kind of have a relationship and find that middle ground. And that was something that was unique to Los Angeles, and I think it continues to this day, and that's really exciting.
So how about you? We met a couple times, and she has some incredible background, and I think I'd like to hear your story about your background.
I am a native Angelino, but my parents immigrated from the Caribbean in the 1920s. And growing up, coming of age in the 60s, I struggled with trying to convince my family that we were black. And my mother kept saying, we are not black, we are Caribbean. And I kept saying, what are you talking about? It just didn't make a lot of sense to me, but as I started really pursuing writing, poetry specifically, more seriously, I really wanted to explore that connection that they maintained while very much wanting their children. I'm one of 5, the youngest, the prettiest. I have 4 older brothers. Why it set them apart, and also started to understand how it set me apart, being very much a child of what they had experienced and what it was for them to be here as immigrants. My mother never really wanted to go back. My dad always wanted to go back. So that was always a point of contention. But now in my poetry, a lot of it circles around my parents' immigration and what they went through and how that impacted all of us. But I think maybe Denise said it, maybe we all said it in one way or the other. I do find that I use bits and pieces of different cultures in my writing because it's so rich and it's there and it's not everywhere else. So I kind of want to celebrate it and almost use it without being aware that I use it. And I suspect, listening to all of you, even when you think it's not really in your work, it's in your work if you don't want to go back to St. Louis or wherever it was. But I also think that Hirokazu has an interesting story because he's back and forth to Japan, and I think the group
I'll
would like
speak-
to hear about
I think
that.
I'll speak behalf of everyone here. I think Los Angeles is incredible. The scale is so different than other countries. I think, let me explain to you the scale that I belong to. In Japanese, we write vertically. English, we write horizontally. But I think English, written horizontally, but I think we speak very vertically. In Japanese, we write vertically, but I think we speak horizontally. They're not so much yes and no and black and white. They're called in-between space. And I think I grew up in that situation. When I came to, I think, Los Angeles, I saw that kind of a scale, different between a grammatical difference. For example, A and D, the conjunction between two entities. In Japanese, there is none. Everything is conjoined and oneness, and the void is very important. So I think in my work, and I think many of us here, perhaps we are lingering in that subject of the scale. I mean, we don't get rain, we get sunshine all the time. And the scale perhaps in your space is much bigger than some areas. I talk about a Japanese scale in some sense that Los Angeles is like a rat in a shoebox. But in Japan, they're elephant in a matchbox, that kind of scale. And I think maybe you could talk to us about that kind of sensitivity of how you work in this incredible Los Angeles scale, perhaps. Clemens.
I always listen to Hirokazu because he's like a mentor for a lot of us younger artists. Not that I'm right behind him. We're not that much different. But gosh, how do you fall? How do you fall? Only thing I would add to that is I think as the Japanese, I work at the Japanese American National Museum, and in many ways we're like a small ethnic specific museum with big aspirations, like I think the elephant in the matchbox. I think, many people look at us and think we just show the work of Japanese Americans, but I think what I have been able to bring to the museum with my experiences is the hybridity of projects that, like right after the riots when the museum opened, we started to work with self-help graphics and Watts Towers and Plaza de la Raza and as many institutions as we could. Joyce was in one of the shows too. Just talking about how people's histories are told through their art from different cultures and mixing these artists up into different institutions so that other people could begin to see, like they would come to the Japanese American National Museum and say, why is this Charles Dixon here, this black artist here? It doesn't make any sense. They're like, well, what we're trying to do is show the content of the work and understand that what we're all speaking the same language, it just has different perspectives. And for us, I think it's this thing about truth and history and how there's this linear history that we all sort of learned growing up in America, but it's this diversity that makes this truth even stronger and harder to break or tumble down. And I think that's something that we only have in Los Angeles. Well, not only in Los Angeles, but I think that's the strength of America is the diversity. And as long as we can strive for that, I think that will make America stronger.
I think you both mentioned two words that are really important and present in my work, hybridity or hybridism, and the space in between, because I always felt like I am a hybrid of two cultures. I'm not there, I'm not here, I am somewhere in between. And that kind of premise is in myself led me to pursue this series of video works that I did, which actually started here with the COLA grant that I went to the Azores to explore my own roots. But I think my work is place-based art, and the idea of exploring how we people like me navigate or circulate between two more places and cultures and how that is manifesting their everyday life. So I'm really interested in addressing that sense of culture, sense of place and cultural identity. The way that I do that sometimes is not very, I do use ethnographic approach, but then I use also non-linear poetic ways to address that. So the work itself is somewhere in between, and it's not like this literal translation of place. So anyway, I just felt like that inspired me to say this words.
I just want to say that the project that Clement talked about, Finding Family Stories, was that was probably something about being in LA and the Japanese American Museum starting that, where they collaborated with other kind of, I guess what you would call ethnic museums, community art museums, but they had a specific orientation to a particular community, and that was really interesting because we got to go and meet the community and show in those museums and work with the other artists. It was really interesting because we went to Santa Barbara and we worked with indigenous artists, and we got a private tour of the collection at the Museum of Natural History. And yeah, it was a really wonderful project, and I think probably indicative of what happens here.
I'd like to say something about activism in LA, and it seemed to be a place where we get activated politically charged. You know, LA wasn't always a great place of diversity. There was times where we were all living in separate communities, and I remember that as a child, and there's still some of that around, but I think there's a mindfulness of breaking down barriers, getting activated to fight that. You see it in the artwork, I think. What's so unique is the diversity of just this group here, and if we probably looked at each other's art, you could see that there's that, that little pushing and trying to find something new, create something different with all this that we have here. And I think that's really a wonderful combination of things that happens only here in LA, I think, anyway.
Oh God, again, it's all based on the food. No, we have all these wonderful ethnic backgrounds in the music and the food and the art. And I've gotten in the past, ever since I won the 14, and a little bit before that, a lot into my Native American background and working with the Autry, and I never knew about that. Like I was saying earlier, when I was reading that word when I was in school as Native, and it really was naive. I mean, I wasn't thinking of who I was, or, I was some white girl with a Jewish dad, and we were raised in a Unitarian church because my mom said she wanted to put water on us so we wouldn't get mad at her when we got older and say, how come we didn't go to church? Because she was raised Catholic, and my dad was raised Orthodox Jew, and so we were raised basically as going to art school on Sunday and 7-Eleven if they didn't want to teach art. And so that to me was, I don't know, somehow I know that has to do with here and why I do art, because we did art on Sunday school. So LA rules.
And nothing other than what I already said about the space, and I think what I meant when I said it, I don't think it really influenced my work. I think I was already more interested in kind of non-Western and ancient art objects and cultures before I moved here, and more than I do a lot of ceramics, and I think of it as something that's going to last for thousands of years, and I like to think of it as part of a 15,000-year tradition, and not as contemporary art so much. And I feel more comfortable doing that here, but I think I was already kind of doing that before I came here, but I found a lot more acceptance for it here, let's put it that way.
I think that I was thinking, Linda, about what you were saying about moving around this very large city, and I tell friends from outside of the city that people don't really mean the city of LA when they say LA. They mean Long Beach and all these outlying communities that make up the greater Los Angeles area. And I wonder and suspect that part of it is economics, that broke up some of that segregation and made people move to different neighborhoods for different reasons, and then learn to appreciate, oh, I never had a Korean neighbor, or I never had a Portuguese neighbor, or whatever. And in the course of just regular living and food, always food, came to appreciate and find kind of an irony in LA of it explodes every 20 or 25 years ago or so for either for racial reasons or economic reasons. Now we have arguably political reasons that people want to explode. But really appreciate what we have, like I said, when we go to other areas that just don't have the mix, certainly in the artistic community, I think, that we do. What do you think?
I think one of the most important, I think, to all of us, I just read some of your resume, and I seen that many of you were educated here. I too went to a school called Chouinard Art Institute in MacArthur Park, and there was an artist school there, and Art Center was on, I believe it was in 7th Street or something, and I moved to 3rd, and I moved to Pasadena. But all these educators were not so much a teacher, but they were artists. At Chouinard Art Institute, I mean, people like Man Ray was teaching there, and not in my era, but I think that too. And again, you talked about historical viewpoint. I think my period too was Vietnam War was going on, and I think the activists and artists were creating not the word performance, but it was called body art. And myself and Chris Burden and Wolfgang Stockel, we did some kind of a activist performance at Pomona Art College. And I think that too was a part of our history in Los Angeles. I think PST, the Getty Foundation, did an incredible job at creating period exhibitions and things that happened in 60s and 70s. And I think next year is, again, PST on Latin America.
That's the Pacific
Standard Time. And I think, again, I think there's important things happening here in Los Angeles. But I think for me, education was one of the most important period of my life. I mean, Chouinard Art Institute was a very small, tiny school with 75 students. But look at what happened. You know, it just exploded to a different culture.
It's Cal Arts.
Cal Arts now. And I mean, you have incredible student body there now. I mean, there's a lot of Asian communities coming into art field. And I think...
Yeah, I would like to echo that. I work at Otis, and just the student body there is the most diverse I've ever seen, you know. A lot of Asians, but also a lot of Latinos coming through now, which I don't think there were a lot. In my day, there weren't, you know. And and I think that's what also is making the art community here so lively. You know, there are a lot more people participating now.
Yeah, I think it's future artists here in Los Angeles, I think. You know? I mean, not just art schools, but, you know, university as well. I mean, UCLA, USC, Cal State, you know, Long Beach, all that, I think, become educational sort of a hunting ground for artists.
We have about 5 minutes left, so let's keep that in mind and whoever wants to.
I wanted to ask, how do we define Western and non-Western, and how do we learn that? Are we indoctrinated through a school and the books we read? Or I was sort of tackling that question. I just sort of want to throw it out there.
I went to Scripps College out in Claremont, part of the Claremont colleges, and a long time ago. And when I was there, I was interested in studying art history, even though I wasn't an art history major. And it was all, I think I can say, pretty exclusively European based. So for me personally, when I think of Western and non-Western, I think of Europe, and then every place else is non-Western. And I remember asking the professor, you know, it's all European. I mean, it's fine. I like Monet, but what about, and so she said to me, she said, well, you're just mad because we don't have African artists. I said, I'm mad because you don't have Chinese artists or South American artists or anything but European, primarily French and Italian artists. That, I said, yes, it would be nice to have African artists. So for me personally, that's how I make that distinction.
Sorry. You know, there has also been several labels for that, for the non-Western. It used to be world, global, ethnic, oriental, because people are always trying to put you in a box, you know, to see where. So non-Western is really a broad term. It's hard to see where you would place, you know, anybody, or do we want to be placed? Do we want to just belong as human beings with everybody else? You know, that to me that makes sense.
So I guess it does make me wonder about, like, the term not Western versus other immediately puts Western in the center, and everything's in response to it. So I feel like the interesting thing as artists is that you could complicate it in a way. We can complicate it in a way that it's more like everything, even the playing field. So it's not, we're not creating work in response to Western. It's just that we create multiple voices that allow to coexist. And that's what I think is really interesting about Los Angeles, is there is enough access to resources and to being able to tell one's story or point of view. There's enough that there's space for all those voices to coexist.
And just to add to that, I think for me it's always this argument between classical and ethnic. A lot of times when we talk about ethnic, we always mention food because that's like the ethnic thing. But it's really for where I work at the museum, it's about trying to dispel that whole notion of the other, that we're trying to raise the work that we do to a level of classical, where you're not asking if it's ethnic or classical, but that there is no differentiation. But that's sort of the natural inclination that we have from schooling and stuff.
I think we're now starting to touch on that issue, is if we are making work from our own background, does it become a label that we get stuck with and then keep us always outside the norm?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that that's something I often think is when we think about ethnic, is not, to me, it doesn't mean the biological, it's the cultural, and that could be anything, like you said, right? It's not my DNA from a color or something else, but it's culturally what I'm relating to and thinking about.
I've been thinking about what you mentioned about that comment, you know, that as much as we may think our work isn't, you know, about where we're from and from here, but it works its way in. And I mean, I can see that my work has always been about the urban environment and such, but you know, I'm trying to really, I've been thinking about that for the last, you know, 15, 20 minutes or so, just really trying to delve into that concept and really think more about, you know, how is it coming through in my work? And I think my work has always been not so much about literally people and cultures, but I think when I depict elements of the urban environment and things that I see around me in the city, and they work their way into my work, whether it's kind of more abstracted or I'm literally presenting and representing those things in my paintings or drawings. I think you know, obviously I'm depicting things that are created by very diverse peoples, and so I guess in that sense it makes its way into my work, but not maybe not in a literal sense, but it's the products of people, you know, of who are creating buildings and structures and you know, fabrics and, you know, all kinds of products and everything that I see and experience around me that are in the city that makes its way into my work, you know, whether it's, yeah, some kind of structure that I see that's, you know, that strikes me and it makes its way into a drawing, or so in that sense, perhaps it's kind of a roundabout way that it makes its way into my work.
I think that we are the perfect example of that cross-section of the arts, a cross-pollination. I don't know whether it's Western and non-Western, depending. Now I'm trying to open my mind to that definition a little bit more, perhaps. But certainly we all have backgrounds where we can point to things that might arguably differentiate us. But it seems to me from the way we've been speaking that we all are drawing from the otherness that some might define to create an art that can be appreciated by a larger group, and that we all can take something from and say, oh, you know, now I'm interested, I want to come and see your dance company, and I want to see the ceramics, and you know, and every little thing, whether we use it that day or next week or 2 years from now, that was some influence. That chest you had with the small figurines in it when I went to visit the cultural center, I've been thinking about that chest a lot. It's quite beautiful with artifacts in separate little, who had the house with the, yeah, you would love this. It had little rooms with different little artifacts in each one, and I've been thinking about that a lot, so it stays with you.
I was a 2013 COLA recipient, and I have always been interested in intercultural performances and intercultural dialogue in my work, and in addition to doing my traditional work. So it has continued to work with artists of diverse cultures and poetry and visual arts and performances, spoken word, and to make it part of my life, which is what, and find some kind of a common platform. So this time on June 24th, we have a performance right here at the Barnsdall, and so the first half of the performance is traditional classical Indian dance, and in the second half we are collaborating with Appalachian flatfoot dance. So, you know, because I learned something if I do things like that, and I think COLA is a very big part of that kind of a fire to continue for me to collaborate. Thank you.
I got COLA grant in 2010, and I had this space right here, and it was a bigger, more open space than I usually work small, and I asked for one of the small rooms, and they didn't give it to me, and so I was forced to make. I kind of improvised 2 bigger installations that I made. One of them I just made to throw away afterwards, and it really spoiled me to get paid to make something with no commercial aspirations at all, and it made me wish I could work like that all the time.
Do you?
I still show at galleries occasionally, but I try to make things that are hard to sell, which works. I'm not sure it's a good business plan.
I also, when I received the COLA, I performed right over here, and it was a performance installation. Really, the COLA had a huge impact on my ability to grow as an artist, because I had to think outside of my own box. I was getting relegated to touring solo and doing kind of the monologue form, and I created work that actually had no words in it, that was having people move through creating their own cycle of picking up a ceramic bone and burying it in eggshells and washing it in projection of light of some hands washing and unwashing themselves. And then putting the bone in front of a mistranslation machine that then mistranslated your best intentions. And so I learned a lot about myself in that work and about taking risks. And I really couldn't have done it. I mean, the money was very significant to me being able to grow because I didn't have to think commercially about the next gig. And then I made a commitment to myself after I finished that project that I would not go back to just doing the gig mentality. I had to think differently from that point on.
I was a COLA artist in 2007, seems so long ago. And at the time, I mean, I think a lot of my work has always been trying to topple this Western European canon and trying to find a place for my work. At the time, I was doing these mashups of a lowrider rickshaw, kind of based on the whole experience of being called Chino in my neighborhood. And so lowrider, rickshaw, and just made these things that people, I would pull them around, we'd ride them, they'd have like music playing really loud. And getting the COLA grant with that type of work, for me, really validated what I was doing and really gave me even more confidence to pursue. I probably made 3 rickshaws, but other things in the same vein. And last year it was actually shown at the Smithsonian, so that's a good thing.
I received a COLA in 2006. Again, I echo his sentiment about validation. I think it made me Los Angeles artist. I didn't really do a work of my piece here. It was done for a dancer named Oguri. And we have been working for such a long time that I wanted to kind of give him the stage. And Yuval Run was another musician that he too. So it was a collaboration between myself and Oguri and Yuval Run, who it was called Charcoal Pit, and it was a couple tons of charcoal here in this floor. And so, again, the validation of all these artists that we worked with together made some sense, and very happy for being a recipient.
I was a recipient in 2016, and the validation was not only internal, but it was interesting to me the way others started to view me, because they thought, well, wow, if the city thinks you're good enough for that, I guess you're okay. So it was that, but it was also an opportunity in the project that I wanted to work on. I was and remain interested in the way that cities make decisions about what they keep and what they don't keep in terms of neighborhoods or buildings or murals or any other kind of landmark. And I was nostalgic for landmarks that aren't here anymore. I thought, well, I could at least try to write them back into existence. And I was also interested in things that have been covered up, such as, and I still haven't finished this, such as the fact that where the downtown courthouse is on First and Hill was once the spot of a lynching. So I'm interested in kind of excavating the history of the city, and so this project really forced me to kind of focus, or the grant forced me to focus on the project in a way that I might not have done in such an organized fashion.
I have to say that this gallery over the years has been the place I've looked to since I was very young. It was happening here. I mean, the interesting art. You know, I didn't go to commercial galleries. I would come to the LA Municipal over the years, and it was a big thing to become part of it as a fellow. It validated me. I have no representation in a commercial gallery, so I make very little money on my art. The money that I received floated me on and to do other projects, and it's got me to the next level. So I'm very grateful to be a part of it and to have the standing. It means quite a bit, and I hope they continue, because I think it's something that's, you know, just doesn't happen everywhere, and it's so important. So I'm just really grateful.
When I got the award, I made a big bear that was about 10 feet high, and it was a mauling bear, and it was like go shopping, mauling, kind of like LA, what everybody does. And so inside the bear on the chest was shaped like the shape of a church window, and it was 2 layers of stained glass with these shopping bears, and it was, oh, I can't remember right now which mall it was, but it was one furthest east. It was the Thousand Oaks Mall, and I got the grant to do that. And what I learned the most, I loved this, is hire out things you cannot do. And so I had a blast. I got somebody else, I got my taxidermist to do the bear, and then I got this other guy to do the lighting because it was lit from inside so that you could see it like a church, and it was, that's what I want to learn how to do, like what you were doing with all the charcoal. I would love to make another piece, but I don't know how structurally to do that, and I don't know how to work with other people or how to learn how to work with other people so that you can apply for grants or even just do a piece with other people, but something that's big. So if anybody, gives me any ideas, I'm open to it. Oh, okay.
I was a recipient in 2014, and like others have said, I mean, it was just very freeing to have that funding to create something without any pressure for commercial applications of it and having to sell it. And so that allowed me to create a piece that I had just barely started a pencil drawing that was one of my largest ones I had ever done. And so it allowed me to finish it and exhibit it. And a piece that took me almost a year to finish that drawing. And so that was really wonderful to get, that opportunity. But it also represented, actually the very end of that body of work was pretty much with the COLA pieces. I felt I had said what I needed to say with the work, and so having the COLA grant allowed me to then finish it as I saw fit and then move on. And now my work is completely different. I do mixed media paintings, so it was just that step that I needed to go on to the next phase.
I had the experience like you where they came to my studio and I had been playing around. I got the COLA in 2008. We were still, it was the time when it was before the election, and I was upset about the United States using torture. And so I did a piece using the text of the Geneva Conventions. And when they came to my studio, I had this little maquette with these little they were like paper airplanes. And I thought I was going to get one of these little rooms. And then they said, no, we're putting you out here in the front. and I came in with one paper airplane. It was about this big. And I was like, I did a little test, hanging it, and I thought, oh my God, I have 3 months to fill, by the time, so I had to amp up, and I had to incorporate volunteers and go to all these classes, and I teach, luckily. People lent me their classes. I had clubs coming, and we made, well, now I know because you guys counted them when they came down to the airport, 937 airplanes, and filled this spot with it. And so during the opening, somebody said to me, you should show this at the United Nations. And so, I mean, I don't know if I would ever have thought, yeah, after having done this. So I called the United Nations. I talked to someone in Geneva, where where they were written, and but they ended up taking them to New York, and they were. I did an installation in the lobby of the United Nations with an artist, an African artist, who was came over from Norway, where he'd been doing a residency. So he orchestrated taking them to Norway. So I went to Norway with them, and in suitcases. And then they came back here, and so I've been on this kick with paper airplanes now for like 10 years. They were at the California African American Museum, every time a different configuration, and then they were just at LAX for 3 years and came down, and now they're back in their suitcases.
Thank you. When I received the COLA grant, I was very honored to be in relation with some of the teachers that received COLA grants before, like Michael Brewster, Phyllis Green, Jack Butler. So when I received it, Susan Rankaitis, I felt like, wow, can I do that? It was also the year that they had us do 2 projects. One was at the Plaza della Raza and then here. And so it was a real challenge to kind of see my work in a more public environment. And so that was really a great opportunity to see how I could do something that was a little less intimate, and how can I play with scale so that it could configure that kind of world. And then, so I'm really grateful and that it challenged me in that way.
I received the COLA grant in 2009, and that was a time when I started doing artistic residencies and traveling overseas to research and do projects. And that also was a time when I started doing multiple screen video installations and using that multiple ways to tell a story through different points of view and perspectives. And that's something that I'm still doing. So it had a big impact in me and in my work in a positive way. And of course, it was an honor to also, like you said, be in the company of so many amazing artists that I admired for many times. So thank you, COLA.